listener production.
Hey, Chris Beery with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Have you heard of the Hawk Tuah Girl?
Hawk Tuah and spit on that name, you get me?
Well, that's 22-year-old Hailey Welch, who shot to global fame after an interview with her on the streets this year went viral. Since then, she's launched a podcast, merch line, and more recently, her very own cryptocurrency. But some are claiming it's all a scam.
Very hard to know how much she knew about how this was going to operate and how this was going to function and what real risks the people that I guess were investing in her image, her brand, her influencer status were taking.
That chat coming up in the second half of this episode, but first, it's time for Headlines with Bensi and Siebert on Thursday, December the 12th.
Good morning, Chris. Every woman who's worked for mining giants BHP and Rio Tinto over the past 20 years will be invited to join a class action alleging sexual harassment. This is a massive deal. So a Brisbane law firm has reportedly launched this class action, led by two unnamed women alleging female employees have been exposed to appalling sexual abuse at mine sites over many years.
Yeah, the allegations include male miners groping, urinating on, or defecating in front of women, sending unsolicited sexual videos, verbal abuse, stealing underwear, videoing change rooms, the list goes on. BHP has said sexual harassment has no place in our workplace and apologised unreservedly to anyone who has ever experienced any form of harassment at BHP. Rio Tinto released a report last month which found bullying and harassment were common at its sites. It said it treats claims with the utmost seriousness and encouraged people to report harmful behaviour.
All this comes after a pretty massive parliamentary inquiry report came out of Western Australia where the big miners had to reveal that there were dozens of sexual harassment claims that were being made by their staff or had been made by their staff. It also comes at a pretty bad time for BHP, particularly because it only recently agreed to pay more than $40 billion in compensation over the 2015 collapse of a dam in Brazil, which killed 19 people.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he supports creating exclusion zones to prevent protests near houses of worship. It comes after the fire attack on a Jewish synagogue in Melbourne and after a car was set alight and anti-Israel graffiti left on houses and businesses in Sydney. The Victorian and New South Wales government are both looking to impose the bans, which would operate similarly to safe access zones in most states and territories around abortion clinics, Bensian.
Yeah, there has been some concern from civil liberties groups about this proposal and its practicality. Like, what do you do where places of worship are very near institutions of government where people regularly protest? I haven't been to Sydney in a while, but I'm pretty sure like Town Hall and there's a large church near there, for example. It would also be the most recent in a long line of legal crackdowns on protest in general in Australia. There, for example, have been laws to minimise environmental protest in Tasmania, and quite recently South Australia imposed potential jail time or a $50,000 fine for obstructing traffic. So although there might be good reason for preventing people from being harassed at a place of worship, for example, I think anti-protest politics only seem to be heading in one direction in this country, and that is something I think we should keep an eye on. And we did a big deep dive on anti-Semitism and the politics around it yesterday. If you scroll back on your feed, you'll find it there.
Over now to the world of football, where FIFA has announced Saudi Arabia as the host of the 2034 Men's World Cup. This comes as no surprise to those who have been following the story for a little while, and that's because FIFA gave potential bidders less than a month late last year to submit their interest in hosting. Australia, we were keen to win the hosting rights on the back end of a successful Women's World Cup last year, but officials cited that small window to make submissions as the reason that we pulled out. Look, there are allegations of backdoor deals and a lack of transparency, but in effect, that small window and our withdrawal meant that Saudi Arabia has been the sole candidate since October 2023. And that's welcomed by the country because it's a key part of their King's Vision 2030, and that's his strategy to build a vibrant society and thriving economy, Bensian.
vibrant society, thriving economy, and dead migrant workers. The reason I say that is that, to put it mildly, a lot of people aren't particularly thrilled about this. It's been condemned by Amnesty International, who've expressed humanitarian concerns, labelling it a reckless move and a moment of great danger for human rights. Their concern is based on last time a Men's World Cup was hosted in the region in 2022 in Qatar, where thousands of workers died building stadiums. We do know that matches will be held in 15 stadiums across Saudi Arabia, just 4 of which have been built so far.
Yeah, and Saudi Arabia has been accused of sports washing in recent years, having invested around $10 billion in sports since 2021. And there's a lot of people that are saying they're doing that on purpose to improve their reputation. Saudi Arabia is an oil-producing kingdom. They don't have the greatest human rights record. Their environmental impact is, just stacking up over the years. But look, hopefully lessons were learnt from 2022, and I know that human rights organisations will be keeping a very, very close eye on this. So, as I say a lot of the times on this podcast, only time will tell. And changing pace now with some excellent news I am welcoming this morning. $3 billion in student debt has been wiped. Now, the natural question arises, what does that mean for me? Well, if your loan is sitting around the average, which is $27,000, you can expect to see $1,200 credited to your outstanding loan right now. It's part of reforms introduced by the Albanese government to address the 7.1% indexation hike student loan holders copped last year.
Yeah, it was a big one. That increase in people's HECS debts was based on the Consumer Price Index, which is basically inflation, as in the rising cost of everything. As everyone probably remembers, inflation was incredibly high last year, and that meant that people's HECS debts were bumped up, in some cases by many thousands of dollars. Now, under this new legislation, which was passed last month and basically came into effect over the past 24 hours, that indexation will be calculated on either the Consumer Price Index or the Wage Price Index, that is, how much the average wage is growing. And case in point, last year, the Wage Price Index was sitting at 3.2%, a lot lower than the 7.1%. So essentially what the government has done is backdated the reforms, with Minister for Education Jason Clare saying this wipes out what happened last year and makes sure it never happens again.
Yeah, and student debt has been a key focus of the Albanese government in the past few months. We've branded it an early election promise last month when he and his Education Minister, Jason Clare, as you mentioned there, came out and said that they want to wipe a further 20% off student debt. So that's around a $5,000 reduction for the average student loan holder. And we deep dived into this last month. The episode is called Can Australia Afford Free University? That deep dive was brought by yours truly, shameless plug. Definitely worth a listen. It's super interesting to see how student loans is kind of forming part of Albanese's politics. The good news is you can actually check right now on your ATO account via MyGov to see if that credit has hit your loan. Bensian, also good news for someone like you. Those who paid off their HECS debt in 2023 or 2024 will also be refunded. So I know you have access to your ATO account, unlike me, who has a new phone and is locked out and is waiting for a security email from the government so I can get in. Bensian, give us the rundown. How did you go? Did you get money back?
Well, if you were a stupid idiot like me and paid off your debt after the indexation, but before the government decided to do something about it, then you will actually get something back. I checked mine and I'm getting a little over $500, which is just a little treat. Which we love to hear. And
sticking with the theme of money, coming up next is our deep dive looking into the Hawk Tuah cryptocurrency and whether it's all a scam.
Hailey Welch created her career from a viral on-the-street interview, becoming known as the Hawk Tuah Girl.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
You gotta give him that Hawk Tuah and spit on that thing, you get me?
Her overnight fame and millions of followers turned into a podcast, brand deals, and a merch line. And now she started her own cryptocurrency called Hawk, and people are calling it a scam. The Hawk digital coin hit 490 million market cap shortly after it launched, but soon after it dropped, losing 95% of its value within hours. And fans and investors aren't happy. The team behind the cryptocurrency is over here. So who should people be mad at? The influencer or celebrity as the face of the coin, or the company they've partnered with? Daniel Gozman is a professor at the University of Sydney Business School, specialising in emergent technology. Daniel, welcome to The Briefing. Firstly, can you give a brief explanation of what cryptocurrency is?
Cryptocurrency is a form of digital money. It circumvents traditional forms of money in the sense that it can be established and organised and run by pretty much anybody who has access to the technologies which underpin it, which is blockchain or distributed ledger technologies. It allows people to create their own currencies which have some kind of underlying token which relates to something. So that can relate to, for example, shares in a business. It can relate to a share in a company, an organization, perhaps shares in a new book someone's writing, a new record, a piece of software that's being developed, or it can just be tokenized towards an image or a meme or something like that. So it's a new way of creating value or a currency, and the value that underpins it is very variable and can differ dramatically regarding who's delivering it. But of course, the big problem with these types of things is that while most currencies are created by a central bank, these currencies are created by individuals which are not in the same way trusted entities, or in the same way even as transparent as to who these individuals are, in the same way we all know that our dollars and pounds, etc., come from the Bank of England, the Fed, or the Reserve Bank of Australia.
So when an influencer or celebrity partners with a crypto company to start their own currency, who do you think holds more power?
Well, definitely the people that are developing and designing the protocols behind the cryptocurrency. So when a currency is designed or introduced, there'll be different factors to consider. For example, who gets access to the first tranches of the cryptocurrency, who gets preferential treatment perhaps, or preferential rights, but also how many of the cryptocurrencies can be issued. So one of the problems might be that you would have, say, 100 cryptocurrencies issued and everybody is quite content that each one of those is worth $1. But if then we issue another 100 of those, then what does that mean for the value of the existing ones? So the people who are organizing, running, creating the protocols, the rules under which the cryptocurrency operates are certainly the ones in control.
Do you think that when we see influencers like Hailey Welch in this example, with their faces and their names and their kind of celebrity status being used to sell these cryptocurrencies and get people to invest and buy, do you think that they are kind of being used as pawns in the situation?
I think it's very hard to tell how much people know about this, how much is transparent. I suspect that there are similar numbers of individuals. If you watch CoffeeZilla's excellent podcast, it seems to point that there are repeat offenders within the industry who seem to be doing same sort of things under different guises. Very hard to know how much she knew about how this was going to operate and how this was going to function, and what real risks the people that I guess were investing in her image, her brand, her influencer status were taking. I mean, it's difficult to know if she understood the risks and misrepresented them, or if she perhaps just thought this was a good opportunity and people persuaded her it was a fun and probably lucrative thing to do.
Yeah, and in Hailey's case, her cryptocurrency dropped from 490 million to 60 million in the space of 20 minutes of it being launched. How does something like that happen?
Well, I think it's a nil-sum game. So the problem with these cryptocurrencies is that there isn't a great deal underpinning them. So the value of them is really only in the value that's they're perceived to have. So initially, people obviously perceived that it was valuable and more people were buying them. It was probably going up in price at that point. It was attractive, and then people started pulling out. And then I imagine the price dropped very rapidly. But there's nothing really that underpins that. The value of the cryptocurrency is purely in the eye of the beholder, if you like, in the value of the people that decide that it is worth something, because it's not underpinned So some cryptocurrencies, for example, are pinned to dollars or stable currencies, so-called stable coins. And there you can see a relationship between the value of the dollar, for example, and the value of the digital currency. But in this case, it's underpinned by almost nothing of value. So it's going to be, as long as people perceive it as valuable and want to pay the money for it, and that's fine. A bit like investing in a racehorse, I guess. You kind of invest in shares in a racehorse, and if it's doing well, it seems to be winning, then that's great. But then at some point, the horse maybe stops doing so well and you want to sell and get out. But some people are going to be left out of pocket.
You mentioned this before and you spoke of CoffeeZilla, and they actually talked about this idea of the pump and dump scheme, which has been around for a while and used by a lot of these big kind of platform people. What does that exactly mean, this pump and dump scheme?
So this is a scheme actually that was also popular in the stock exchange in America in the 1980s and was eventually outlawed. So it's not a thing that's new or unique to cryptocurrencies. What effectively it means is that it's running up the value, hyping the value of the coin or the investment. So pumping its value up and up. In the first instances of this, it was done through large call centers in the US where people would be ringing investors and giving them advice to invest in the particular stock. Obviously, this sort of stuff is no longer done through phone calls or cold calls, but internet and the hype and social media, etc. So hyping until it reaches a certain point of value. And then everybody who is in the know, or the people that have perhaps created the currency and understand that it's probably reached its peak, then pull out very quickly. And that causes the price to plummet. So people are encouraged to invest in things perhaps that they think is going to maintain its value. But actually the people that are doing the pumping, if you like, are pumping the price up and then seeking to dump the stock as soon as it starts to look like it's reached its peak.
And why do you think people online and some of her fans have been calling her crypto a scam?
I think that's interesting. I mean, I guess people hold a lot of stock with influencers. They hold a lot of power. As the name suggests, they can influence people and persuade people. So if they're using their credibility to promote things which are financially responsible, then I would imagine that that's quite a dangerous thing in terms of their reputation. But also it's taking advantage of people because people trust them. And really, again, in traditional financial services products, this is where regulators would step in and say that to be able to offer this sort of thing, you need to be a trusted institution or organization. You may have to be licensed, and you would have to have gone through various checks and also be very careful about how you communicate risk to your investors. So the question I have, I guess, is I wonder very much how much of her fans that invested in it did so with understanding the risks of these type of investments, that they could lose everything and that it's very much a gamble and it's not really underpinned by anything or regulated well in many cases. And so just using their kudos credibility to push something which is effectively a very high risk financial investment is poor practice, I would say, quite unfair. And the job of regulators is to protect consumers from exactly this sort of thing in financial services and to make sure that people understand the risks. Nothing wrong with high risk, of course, if it's got a high reward to it, as long as the investor understands that that's what they're getting into.
Yeah, speaking of regulators and, we talked about the big banks and how that's all kind of monitored and how cryptocurrency isn't as so. How is something like this legal?
Well, it would depend on the regime, I guess, where the asset is regulated or where the asset originated from, which may be under different legal jurisdictions. It becomes very sticky if you're investing, for example, here in Australia to something that's regulated in Australia. But generally speaking, consumers should be protected under general laws not to be misled or for people not to have deceptive conduct. So that's a case across consumer protection laws across Australia. The problem, of course, is that if the people doing this are based in other parts of the world under different legislative regimes, it becomes harder to extract your money back.
More and more young people are investing in meme coins and things like that. But experts have been saying that they're also losing money. Do you think celebrities endorsing things like crypto can be misleading?
I think anybody presenting cryptocurrency could be misleading if they don't talk about the risks. So I don't think that's exclusively to celebrities. It could apply to financial advisors, but really anyone pushing these type of schemes has a responsibility to articulate the risk responsibly to the investors and make them understand what the potential hazards are and what they could lose.
Fans and buyers online, we talked about this before, they're not happy, and some have even claimed that they've put their life savings into this particular crypto. Whose fault is that? Is this the investors? Is this the crypto companies? Is this Hailey? Who is at fault?
Well, for me, I think it's a combination of people that would hold responsibility for this. I would hope that Hailey would have done her a little bit of due diligence to understand what's going on rather than putting her name to just something completely random, and then maybe may have made a decision about whether or not she wanted to do it. Certainly the people that designed the coin and operated it are at fault, but also I think that there's some responsibility towards regulators and to allow these sort of schemes to persist. However, it should be said that, whether or not these sorts of things are considered a financial product or service is really limits the ability of regulators to be able to act. So, of course, going back to the analogy we used earlier, the racehorse, there's nothing wrong with people making very high risk investments. People do it all the time. You might invest in a property that's very high risk. You might invest in a piece of land because you hope it's going to be developed and lose all the money because it's not. You may invest in a racehorse, a greyhound, whatever it might be. So people do take risky investments all the time, and there's nothing preventing them from doing that. And if they lose their money and the investment isn't regulated, then that's just the way the world works. But the problem is when you start doing this under the guise of it being a financial investment, and I think regulators need to get involved with that. And also there's a responsibility in general for consumer protection to make sure that people are not misled and that the risks are transparent.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Professor Daniel Gozman from the University of Sydney Business School there. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this ep with someone else you think might enjoy it too. It really does help us keep creating the content you love. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.